I was 12 years old at the time. It was Saturday evening when I woke up with the worst headache I'd ever felt. I was too sick to share the pizza that was ordered. Pizza was a rare treat in our house, and I was always eager to partake. This evening, I was in so much agony and dizziness that I requested to go to bed. The agony in my head kept me awake for a few hours until I finally fell asleep. The next day, I awakened feeling even worse, with a horrible headache and no relief from the aspirin I was taking. I felt waves of nausea, a severe sense of disorientation, and alternating fever and chills. I slept most of the day and recall waking up the next Wednesday with no recollection of what had happened the previous Sunday. I was so weak and in agony when I awoke that it took me a long time to get out of bed. When I stood up, I instantly collapsed back onto bed due to dizziness and weakness. I stood up again, leaning against the walls for support, and glanced in the mirror. I was astounded by how much my appearance had altered. My skin was white, and my eye sockets were so dark that they stood out against my white skin. What truly frightened me was that my teeth had changed color and were now almost black. I made my way to the corridor and clutched the stairwell railing for support. I couldn't even stand on my own. I arrived at the stairwell landing. My vision distorted the stairway to the point that it appeared it didn't end, but I knew I had to get down the stairs since seeing a doctor was critical to my survival. I was dizzy and knew I wouldn't make it down the stairs without falling, so I sat on the top step, stretched out, and slid down the stair risers until I reached the bottom. My grandma was in the kitchen, so I begged her to call an ambulance and tell her I needed to see a doctor right away. My grandma summoned a taxi, procured some clothing for me, and we proceeded to the doctor. Everyone else in the waiting room was so taken aback by how horrible I looked that they demanded the doctor see me before they were seen. I went into the doctor's office while my grandmother remained in the waiting area. He inquired as to what was wrong. Because it was difficult for me to speak, I began to cry. I was lost and overwhelmed, and I asked for his assistance. He checked me, took my temperature, and drew blood and urine samples from me. Then I was told to wait while he summoned my grandmother to his office and closed the door. They appeared to have been there for quite some time. Finally, I was given a prescription for penicillin and medication to help with my dreadful, hacking cough, and my grandma was told to contact him immediately if my health worsened. I had a 103-degree fever, was very dehydrated, and was excruciatingly skinny. He was prepared to admit me to the hospital if my condition did not improve by the weekend. My grandma wanted to keep a watch on me at home, so I stayed downstairs on the couch because I was too weak to climb the stairs. My condition improved over the next 3 days, and by the following Monday, I claimed I could go to school. For a few days, I went to school where all the other students refused to sit near me, and some commented on how bad I looked. I had stopped taking the prescription on Monday, believing I no longer required it. The school had apparently been informed the previous week that I was severely ill, and some of the students were advised that I might not be returning. The teacher said it was too soon for me to return to school. I relapsed after a few days of not taking the prescription and had to return home. This is where the NDE enters the picture. It was early in the morning, and I was asleep. I felt dreadful, fought to breathe, and was suffering from the same terrible headache and fever. I couldn't sleep because I was in too much agony, so I stayed awake until I was exhausted and then fell asleep. I believed I was having a nightmare. I was in a bluish kind of darkness when a young man appeared, seemingly floated above me. He was dressed in some type of white shift, but I could see right through him. He invited me to accompany him and assured me that he would not harm me. I took his hand in mine and began to ascend from my bed towards the ceiling. When I peered down, I noticed my curled-up body at the foot of the bed. We didn't have much time left, according to the man. I told him I needed to say my final goodbyes to my family. He seemed to let me glide over my sister's bed, where I transmitted my love. I then glided through the wall to my brother's room, where all three of us were sound sleeping. I fell through the floorboards and hovered over where my grandmother lay before being yanked back upstairs, where the man grasped my hand again and we flew through the window in my brother's room. As we flew over the neighborhood, headed east, I felt entirely comfortable, loved, and protected by my friend. I noticed the tops of houses, and then we were at the front walkway of a house similar to the ones we had passed. We walked right through the front door. Inside this residence, I felt surrounded by love and compassion. The sensation was intense. There were people I recognized there, including a departed grandmother I'd never met and my paternal grandfather, but I couldn't see them, though I did see others with whom I had a strange spiritual connection. I had never felt such delight in my life. A room at the back of the home had an intense light filtering in through the cracks in the door. I was immediately drawn to this room and wanted to know what was on the other side. A nearby spirit opened the door, and an incredible sense of lightness and joy filled my heart. If you can imagine it, I was practically wrapped in love. I peered around the brilliant light, not straight into it, where human beings, and possibly not human beings, were blissfully reunited with each other. I desperately wanted to step through this door, but someone informed me I couldn't since it wasn't my time yet. I begged to see God, and we had a conversation about life that was far too complicated for any 12-year-old to fathom. Throughout this encounter, I felt as though I was talking telepathically with everyone around me. I was pleading my case, but it was futile. I was told that I had to return, that if I passed through the door, I would never see my family again, and that my fate might not be like others who frolicked in pleasure and love on the other side. I was also advised that while my life had been difficult up to that point, my future would be difficult as well. I had no choice but to live this life since it was my fate. The same young man who had escorted me to this location reappeared and hurried me, telling me that I needed to return quickly. At the same moment, I noticed an elderly man dressed in a suit. He wasn't in the shadows, yet he was clearly visible to me. He cast a glance over his shoulder towards me. I inquired about my friend. "He's your husband," said my buddy. "No way. He's an old person," I said. I made a secret decision not to marry him. I suddenly felt myself traveling through space at a terrifying speed, and then, bang, I could literally hear myself halt dead. When I opened my eyes, my sister was shaking me, and my grandma was standing behind her in my bedroom. As my soul returned to my body, she felt the same power. I burst into tears and became absolutely disoriented. I was forced to stay at home from school for approximately a week until it was safe for me to return. And this time, I was ordered to take my prescriptions until they were gone. This did not bother me. It was a lovely but terrifying experience. I was emotionally unstable for quite some time following that. It seemed as if I had obtained knowledge that other kids my age lacked. It undoubtedly contributed to the person I am now.